Hey everyone. Looking to talk through maybe what I'm thinking about next steps when it comes to my x86 builds. So that's the 286, the 386SX, the 386DX, and then most recently the 486 DLC. But before I get to that, I thought I would maybe just provide a little background on what the last a little bit over a year has looked like up to this point, really starting from scratch on the x86 stuff and getting up to where I'm at, and then what I think I'm going to try to do next, what my next step is going to be. So I'm just sharing my screen here, and I thought I would scroll through just a few things. Many of you have been following along over the last year, and this is stuff you've seen, but I'm going to kind of use it just as a way to talk through some of what I have done. I'm going to jump back to the x86 stuff. Prior to that, I've worked on other projects and things like the 6502 and the 65816 and built my own 16-bit processor, things like that. But on the x86 side, if I jump maybe to the beginning, this was around October of last year. And that's when I decided I would get in here and try to learn about the 286 system. Now, I didn't do 8088 or 8086. I kind of chose the 286 as my starting point. And so I built up a little PCB and eventually got that onto a breadboard. And I worked from this breadboard type of just basic understanding the basic signals of the processor to getting access to RAM, ROM, all those things. And eventually worked up to the point where, I did have a fully functional 280 system. And I guess I should be careful when I say fully functional. To me, it was very functional. So I got to the point of, a breadboard that kept getting built up and through this. But if I keep on going down, I did add in, and I might have to just back up here a little bit. But I did get to the point of, in my x86 build, getting to, for example, running FreeDOS, and had put this into kind of an x86 format. And maybe if I jump in, well, maybe I'll go back to this post from June. Here you can kind of see what this was looking like as far as my system and the build. And so maybe if I just run this for a second, I'm going to mute my speaker here. So if I take a look at what I'm just going to jump to maybe where I can see what this board looked like at this point. But this is what my 286 kind of has come out to look like. So I have my processor and I've got all my RAM and ROM, so my ROMs and my RAM, and got an add-in card for a video card and this IDE interface card, which you've seen me use more recently on my 486 DLC. But this was 286, and it started from a processor on a breadboard and worked its way up to this system. And that has FreeDOS running on it. So I'm writing my own BIOS, but then I got to the point where I could load up FreeDOS and stuff like this and boot up and do something with it. From there, I decided, well, let's maybe take a look at a 386SX upgrade. So that was one of the things I did. I took this 286 and upgraded it with a small little board that I built. And I'm just scrolling here quickly down to the bottom. Kind of this board here you can see sits on top of really the socket that held the 286, and now it hosts a 386SX. So now I have this system that I can pretty easily jump back and forth between a 286 and a 386SX. And that system has been working actually pretty well. Then I decided to get in and take a look at a 386. And so I started with, and more specifically, a 386DX, and that has been this series here, this 386DX, putting it into an EATX form factor. So I've had this upper and lower board, and I've got a series of videos where I've gone through and kind of worked my way up to just this week I've posted on getting an IDE interface in the system and running, and been able to boot it up to FreeDOS. So that is a fully functional 386 system, and what I've actually done recently is put a 486 DLC CPU in that. So it's the maybe I'll just bring this video up here. and jump to a picture of this. But here you're seeing this 386 system. 386DX is what I've been designing it around. And this processor that's in there right now is a 486 DLC. And then here's this IDE interface with a CF card on it, my same video card I've been using. And I've been learning a whole bunch through all of this. Along the way, maybe another comment is, I've kept working on my 286, doing some miscellaneous stuff on it, nothing I've really been posting on. One of the things I wanted to do on my 286 was to maybe get Linux running on it if I could. And I did some research, and really it came down to, with the amount of RAM that I have in that system today, Linux wasn't going to be real feasible, not without doing some work, maybe coding in Linux to take advantage of how I have extended or expanded memory added in my system. So that was going to be a little tricky. And I'm also looking at my 386DX, and I'm thinking that I do want to add more RAM, and I've got 2 megs of physical RAM in it now, and I cut out a portion of it for the segment to get to my video card, and another 64K to get to my BIOS, things like that. But what I am thinking of at this point, I think moving forward, what I'm going to do is go back to my 386 and maybe refactor that and take the things on my 286 that I have not yet put into my 386/486 build, 486 DLC build, and spin a new set of boards for that. And I think I'm going to try to go with a single board. So if I go over to Easy EDA, and I'll just walk through some of these things that I had worked on. So I had created this 286, and I'm just going to pull up the PCB for a minute. And maybe I'll go to a 3D view of it and just kind of take a look at what we've got. But when this comes up, I can kind of scan through it. And again, I got my 286 socket, or I can put that 386SX in there. It's got a math coprocessor that's fully functional. I've yet to do anything with DMA. This board has, I think, everything wired up for DMA, but I haven't gotten to that point that I've really needed it, or taken the time to see if I can validate and program and leverage DMA. So that's something I want to be able to do here coming up. I also have priority interrupt controllers in this board. And then I was also using these programmable peripheral interfaces, and really on my latest 386, 486, I'm not using those at all. Instead, I'm just using a single VIA, which in this system here, I do have one VIA sitting over here that's doing all my SPI type functionality. But some of the things that this board has that I need to get over to my 386 board would be the real-time clock. So there's a spot for me to connect up a real-time clock, and that's this pin header right here. I'm using SPI to connect to the real-time clock. So really on my current 386 build, all I have to do is connect to the pins, and the programming I've already got done, and I would have real-time clock functionality. So I think really the only thing I'd like to add on the 386 board is an actual header to directly connect that real-time clock. But that's not a big deal. It's just a connectivity thing. Functionality-wise, it's not anything too big of a deal. On my 386, I'll have to decide, do I need more interrupt support, or is a single priority interrupt controller sufficient? It probably is sufficient, quite honestly. I'm doing a fair amount with this 286 with a single. I'm not, even though it supports the secondary, I'm not really doing anything with it. I don't have an SD card reader on my 386. That would be an easy add. Again, this is just using SPI. So, I'm using a 6522 VIA here that does SPI to my real-time clock. It does SPI to this SD card reader down here. I can also access keyboard mouse on my 386 through one of these nanos, and I have a nano to communicate to my PC through USB serial, plus do an LCD and I2C LCD output. So really this VIA is the heart of all of that, and I already have that running on my 386. So adding in an SD card should be simple. Adding in the real-time clock should be simple. And so if I jump over to what my 386 currently looks like, here's what this system is shaping up to look like. So this is the upper board that I'm going to pull up. Now, I had done mine in white instead of what this is showing as blue. Of course, I guess I could come in here and have it show it in white. So this is something like what my current board looks like. And then along with that, I have a bottom half of the system. And that maybe is this down here. And I'll pull that up in 3D also. And I can change it to white. So this is close to what my boards look like. But really, when I get back over to this, I've got my processor. I've got it wired up with a coprocessor that I've not yet put in. Here's where that VIA and the headers to get to all of it are at. Here's my priority interrupt controller. I ended up using 3 of these PSOCs. One PSOC is generating a bunch of signals that need to be generated on a 386. I'm also using a pair of these PALs, and that's using kind of the basic out-of-the-box Intel code on those to help generate a bunch of signals. So between these two, along with this one down here, I'm generating the majority of the signals that I need to run the system and the 286 bus or ISA bus, things like that. I've got one decode type of PSOC that's just as I'm learning and going and adding things, I can easily add support for additional decode functionality. And then I have one PSOC that when I turn on the system takes the ROM and copies it into RAM, basically shadows it, and then I run the run the code from RAM. And I'd use these Eurodin connectors. So this is a pair of connectors that connect to the bottom board right here. On the bottom board, then I put in some standard ISA slots. I put in some kind of custom extensions so that I added all the rest of the missing data and address bits that aren't part of the standard 16-bit ISA. So this is kind of my own custom 32-bit ISA, if you want to think of it that way. I have some of these little PCIe X4 ports. These are just simply debug ports. They're not running PCIe or PCI, anything like that. They're just a physical connector that I'm using for easy access for debugging. I have no real-time clock here. I don't have the SD card reader on here. I don't have a secondary PIC on here. So those are things that I want to get added, but probably more important than any of that, I want to see if I can clean up some of the just signals on my system. As I've been building this out, I intentionally went with a 2-layer board because I did not want to spend the money on a 4-layer board. I kind of want to just validate basic functionality. Could I get the core system even running? And if I could get to that point, then maybe I could come back and try to clean it up and make it a little bit better. And I think that's where I'm at. What I'm thinking of doing at this point is creating a new PCB. And I'm going to try my best to squeeze this PCB down a bit. And I'm probably going to have to go with a 4-layer, maybe even a 6-layer board. But I'm hoping to take the lower and the upper and combine them. And so I'll get rid of these Eurodin connectors. I'm probably going to go without these debug ports. They're convenient, but they take up a bunch of space and also force me to route a lot of things down to this part of the board that I probably don't need down here. I'm going to also have minimally a ground plane, but probably a ground and a VCC, so a GND and a VCC plane that I'll get put in here. And then maybe a layer or two that have to do with signals. So maybe there's either 2 layers of signal or 4 layers and then a ground and a VCC inner plane. Plus, as I get into all of these signals, so I come out of the processor and all the addresses go through address latches and all the data goes through data transceivers. Something I don't have on a lot of the signals would be, inline resistors. So that's something I found with the clocks coming out of this PSOC down here. I have 4 different clock signals coming out. There's a clock 2, a clock, there's a peripheral clock, and then I also have a clock for the VIA. So there's a VIA clock. I should have some inline resistors there. That would be helpful, along with pull-ups for those clock lines would be nice. And that same thing goes for a lot of my other controls that are coming out of this control latch. I probably should have added some inline resistors, or at least a location that I could at least put a 0 ohm resistor if I don't want a resistor there. Or I could put in, a 10, 20, 30 ohm type of inline resistor. And those are kind of hard to add at this point to a board. Pull-ups aren't so bad. I can take a resistor, take it to a pin underneath and pull it up or pull it down if I want to. That's not so bad. But the inlines, that's kind of hard to do. So I think what I intend to do then is to take these two, the upper and the lower. I'm going to focus it just on the 486 DLC, which should also mean that the 386 DX would work fine. But I'm probably going to target it towards the 486 DLC, see if I can expose some of the pins there that are used for the cache management, things like that I don't exactly know how I'm going to use yet. I probably need to add a DMA controller on here. I don't have that on this either. And I do want to get to that, so I think I have a plan for having that wired in, but I need to do my best to get that into the design before I order up this next round of PCBs. And then there's a bunch of other just miscellaneous things, and I kind of been keeping notes as I go through, and I have things that I want to do. I just put little to-dos in. And so, for example, pull-ups, pull-downs, and all the signals. I'm going to add clock distribution ICs. And really, I think that's mostly going to apply just to CLK. CLK2 probably just only goes to the processor. But CLK, I need to distribute to all the ISA connectors and other things on the board. So I'll get clock distribution ICs put in. There's an example of a really nice single board computer out there. Groza is the person's last name, I believe. And let's see if I can even pull that up. Let's see, it's a 386 single board computer, and I'll just bring it down. So yeah, Alexander. So just scanning to the bottom of this page, but this is a nice board out there. So Alexandru Groza is the person's name. I thought I would maybe look through some of the work he's done for inspiration, and there's probably some things I know there's things in here that I can learn and take advantage of. Now, this build is a very professional build. I mean, this is far beyond what I'm chasing right now. Trying to learn how to get to that point that I could do something like this build here, but that's not necessarily where I'm at. But I thought I could at least take a look at what are some of the things. For example, he's using DRAM, which I'm not at this point. That would be great to do that at some point, so maybe that's something I could look at. I'm not going to do that with this next build, though. That's further down the road. I think this PCI slot, I'm going to ignore that. The BS16, and actually my last video, I got all that working, so I'm going to take those away. If I kept the separate boards, there's some cutout work I had to do. I'm also considering I think in the next board I'm going to skip debug ports, but the next time I do debug ports, I'm going to go to something other than PCIe 4 connectors. I've just found that they are not robust enough. It's too easy to have a poor connection with those. So I found that they're not holding up like I want to see them hold up. So I need to find a different type of connector for my debug headers. And then all these pull-ups and such I had talked about. If I go to my upper board, same thing. I've been kind of taking notes as I go, and if I pull up the schematic there, I have a bunch of notes, and I have notes on other sheets in these also, so I need to just flip through all of those. But here's things that I've been considering as I go. I think I've got all that covered, so this bottom one I can take out. Some minor things like a capacitor, some maybe moving things around. I'm probably going to do some better silk screening on the next board. I want to add a bunch of maybe spots to actually do better probing with my oscilloscope, so ground pads. That was suggested by one of you, and so that's a good idea. I'm probably going to do my best to shrink down the form factor to an ATX instead of the EATX, so we'll see how that turns out. I had some minor logic change, or minor wiring change I needed to make for my shadowing of my PSOC. And so that's something I had done manually and pulled up pins on my current system and did a bodge wire. But I want to have that be part of the PCB, of course. Really all the signals on the ISOBus, or really any control signals, I want to have the option to have inline and pull-ups or pull-downs if those should be pull-downs for the ones that are active high. And then maybe go to a 4 or 6 layer board. 4-layer board, maybe I would do one ground plane and one signal plane for the inners and not necessarily a VCC. If I go to 6 layer, then I think I could have ground, VCC, and a couple of signal layers, which would help me, I believe, shrink down the size of the board a bit. But that's the type of stuff that I'm thinking of, I guess. And I definitely would be curious on if any of you have thoughts or suggestions. I know in the past it's been suggested maybe go with a smaller type of design where I can split things into smaller pieces and make them more affordable to order, especially in a 4-layer or 6-layer type of configuration. And I'm not sure what that would look like, especially if I get to these types of ISA slots. Now, of course, I could just have connected into the core a single slot and then have to put in some riser type of expansion for the ISA. So I guess that is a possibility. I could have a riser type of card that gives me multiple ISA slots. There's a lot here. I can get rid of some of this down here. I know I can pack this in a bit tighter, especially if I've got another signal plane that I can use. And I might have to do, some work on the routing and probably do a combination of manual and auto routing as I try to build that out. And I think there's some other things I'll probably find as I get in this and start trying to make an updated board. Looking for ideas. I think what I'm going to do is probably break that into a series of videos and maybe just work on a piece of the schematic and PCB, and then maybe share a video and then work on another piece and share a video and try to collect feedback and ideas as I go. And I'm not in any rush to do this. I have some books I'd like to kind of be reading through as I go through it on just PCB type of design. I have a lot to learn there, so I'll be working on that and trying to just get through this. And maybe my goal would be by the end of December, so maybe 5 weeks from now, to get to the point where I've got the PCBs ready for order. So I think between just busy work and family holiday schedule, that's probably how long it's going to take me to get through doing a full rev of this board, knowing that what I've got here so far seems to be working generally, and that it could be better, and trying to make it better, squeeze it down a little bit, and see what I can do. I think as I go forward, I'm probably going to end the series on the 286, end the series on the 386, and kind of consolidate everything into a new single series, which will be really focused on this 486 DLC build, but it's comparable, same thing as the 386, really not much different there. And it really isn't far from the 286, as far as the stuff I'm doing. I did put out a poll about the 286 and what would people like to see me work on next, and one was Linux, and that one I did research, and I'm kind of saying I'm probably not going to proceed with that one. On this updated board, though, I do intend to have an add-in card that will let me add, beyond my 2 meg, another 4 to 8 meg of RAM, so I can easily add more RAM and then get Linux running. So I think that's going to be an option here in the future. And then the other one that people were asking for, suggested of the choices I gave or asked about, was maybe more BIOS type coding. I have a lot of work to do around graphics. The BIOS that I have on my system right now, it's all written by me. I'm not using CBIOS, I'm not using AMI BIOS or anything like that. And so all of that work I've got to write, whether it's traditional BIOS type routines or it's more of a graphics type of BIOS that I'm talking about. But I've got a lot of work there. And the video card that I have right now is also homegrown, and it's been working just fine for me. But it's not a video card that's going to let me get in and do high speed animation and things like that. So that's something that I'll have to see, how far can I take it with coding in assembly in the BIOS. What can I do with this card the way it sits before I'm going to have to really build something better? And I don't know what that next stage is for me on a video card. So that's probably something I should be working on too, is maybe the next generation of a video card for me. I started with Ben Eater's worst VGA card. That was the first one I did, and then worked myself up to a 320 by 240, and then eventually up to the 640 by 480 by 16-bit color. And this card has been great. I've been happy with it, but it's really not, either the card and or the coding I have for it just aren't quite there as far as high speed, graphics type of work. So for those that want to see Doom running, I'm probably quite a ways from that yet. I appreciate everybody watching the series. I always enjoy the feedback, the comments, the recommended things to change in my design. And I'll continue to look for that type of feedback as we go. So if you've got questions, if you've got ideas, if there's something you really think I should be considering as I'm getting into this 486 type of build, let me know. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, of what can I do to make this better. Any words of wisdom would be appreciated. So stay tuned for more. I'll see if I can post some starter type schematic changes or PCB layouts here in the coming few weeks.